So you are standing in the middle of a grocery store aisle, right?
Mhm.
And you are agonizing for like 20 minutes over whether to bring the spinach dip or maybe a moderately priced bottle of Malbec to a dinner party.
Oh, yeah, the classic dinner party panic.
Exactly. I mean, you want to contribute the right thing to the physical table,
Yeah.
but what you probably aren't considering, what none of us really consider, is this invisible, heavy casserole dish of whatever mood you've been stewing in all day, and
Right.
you are about to carry that right through the front door. We spend so much time curating what we physically bring to a space, but we almost completely ignore our psychological payload.
It's so true.
And this is basically the central premise of a really fascinating document we are taking a deep dive into today. We are looking specifically at entry 3401 in the text known as Dynaxiom 3401-3410.
Yep.
And this entry defines any gathering as a potluck of emotions where everyone brings something different.
It's a concept that fundamentally rewrites our baseline understanding of social dynamics. Because, we generally operate under the assumption that a gathering, whether it is a family dinner, a board meeting, or a party, is a static container.
Like an empty room you just walk into.
Exactly. You step into the container and you assume the event will dictate your mood. But entry 3401 flips the causality entirely. It suggests the gathering is actually an unpredictable chemical reaction.
Okay, I like that framing.
Yeah, so the event doesn't dictate the mood. The highly volatile mixture of individual emotional contributions, that is what dictates the event.
I really want to break down the mechanics of that chemical reaction, because if someone walks into a room carrying a deep unspoken resentment, they aren't just experiencing that resentment in isolation. By this definition, they're actively serving it to the room, like they're putting it on the table. It alters the molecular structure of the entire evening.
You might have one person bringing this light, joyful energy. But if another person brings a heavy, dense side dish of depression or a sharp, spicy serving of jealousy, those elements collide. And the reason this framing is so vital is that it forces a kind of radical self-awareness. It asks you to literally audit your own emotional inventory before you cross a threshold.
Which is hard to do.
It is. You have to ask, am I bringing an ingredient that will curdle the collective atmosphere?
That audit is exhausting to even think about, honestly, but it makes complete sense. And what's really interesting is how the source text moves from that chaotic shared space of the emotional potluck into a highly controlled, solitary space of individual effort. It goes from what we bring to others to what we bring to our own work. And building that internal discipline leads us to entry 3402, which introduces a very specific physical example.
Yes, the text shifts gears here.
It describes working in a sequential series, comparing creative effort to doing laps or reps. And the text points to a real place, Swallow Cliff.
Swallow Cliff is such a fascinating case study for human behavior. So for context, it features this massive, brutal set of steep limestone stairs.
Right.
People go there specifically to subject themselves to extreme physical exertion, just running up and down the steps. But the detail the text focuses on isn't the physical pain itself. It's what happens at the top of the stairs.
Yeah, there is an abacus at the top of the stairs that people use to count their laps, which is just such a strange visual.
It really is.
And if they aren't using the abacus, the text notes that people will physically arrange little pebbles in a sequence on the ground just to keep track of their reps. The author describes this kind of sequential counting as a human universal.
We have to ask why that behavior is universal. Why the pebbles? Why the abacus?
Just remember what lap you're on, right?
The discipline of running the laps and the meticulous arrangement of those pebbles. That is the resistance training for your attention span.
And building that stamina for the details naturally forces us to look at what we're actually holding in our hands when we do the work. And this is where the document fundamentally disrupted how I view my own workspace.
We're talking about tools now.
Yeah. Entry 3404 offers a radical redefinition of what a tool actually is.
It is arguably the most provocative framework in the entire document because it challenges the vocabulary we use every single day to describe our processes.
It really does. The entry states, sometimes what a tool does doesn't matter. If you used something to make something, that doesn't make it a tool if you don't use it again in the same way. In that case, your process becomes the tool.
It's a dense thought.
It is. So let me try out an analogy on you to see if I am digesting this correctly.
Let's hear it.
Suppose I decide to go all out for a holiday dinner, right? And I buy a professional-grade culinary blowtorch to glaze a ham.
Sounds delicious.
I use it for 5 minutes, the ham looks great, and then the blowtorch goes into a drawer and I never touch it again. Under this definition, that blowtorch was never a tool in my kitchen arsenal. It was just an erratic step in my ham-making process.
That blowtorch analogy captures the mechanism perfectly, because the text uses the example of a bandsaw in a woodshop to make a similar point.
Okay, how so?
If you turn on a bandsaw to cut one single specific piece of wood for a cabinet and then you never use it again for that project, the bandsaw is not functioning as a core tool. It is merely a station you pass through.
Like a toll booth on the highway.
Exactly. It is a node in your workflow. Contrast that with the text's other example, a guitar or a piano used to write songs.
Right. With a guitar, you are using it again and again and again in the exact same fundamental way to produce entirely different results. I mean, the strings don't change, the fretboard doesn't change, but the output is infinite.
And that repeated, identical application is the defining characteristic of a true tool. A true tool provides a reliable, unchanging constraint that your human imagination is forced to push against.
A constraint. I like that.
Yeah, a bandsaw just makes a cut. And what elevates this entry from a semantic debate to a really critical modern insight is how it applies this logic to modern technology, specifically artificial intelligence.
This is the part that blew my mind.
The text explicitly notes that if AI was just in the loop at one point, you cannot say it was a tool writ large.
Which flies in the face of the entire current cultural narrative. Every tech CEO and productivity guru is currently screaming that AI is the ultimate tool.
I know. But apply the framework we just established.
Yeah.
If you use a generative AI model to smooth out one paragraph of a newsletter or to generate a single background image for a presentation, it is merely in the loop. It is functioning as an effect. The text makes a hard distinction here. An effect is not a tool, even if you use it repeatedly. An effect just applies a specific algorithmic finish. It is the culinary blowtorch. You are not deeply playing it the way a musician plays a guitar. You are just passing your raw material through a processing station.
The text even points out that you can use a bass like a guitar, or perhaps a guitar like a saxophone, because they are foundational instruments with deep constraints. You can stretch them.
Yes, you can bend the rules of an instrument.
But you cannot play a bandsaw like a guitar. A bandsaw just cuts. AI, in the way most people currently deploy it, is just applying a discrete finish. It's a shortcut, not an instrument.
It forces a necessary audit of our creative workflows. We give undue credit to passing effects and isolated processes, convincing ourselves we are mastering tools when we are really just accumulating blowtorches. If you want to achieve long-term mastery, you have to identify your actual instruments, the reliable constraints that ground your creative rhythm. Everything else is just noise in the process.
So if we are going to strip away the cultural hype around AI and effects, we also have to strip away the deeply ingrained societal biases about what constitutes valuable culture.
Oh, definitely.
And entry 3405 addresses this head-on. It states, exploring an old world can be as good as new. It argues that we operate under this false assumption that whatever is new is automatically superior.
We do assume that. New tech, new media, new ideas.
Right. But the text provides a biological reality check. Human beings have not really evolved psychologically. The old will always suffice because we are running the exact same hardware.
It is a humbling reality, isn't it? A Greek tragedy from millennia ago deals with the exact same flavors of jealousy, pride, and fear that someone might bring to that emotional potluck we discussed earlier. The context changes, the technology changes, but the human heart remains remarkably static. Because of that, the insights embedded in old worlds are entirely applicable to modern friction.
Yet we build these massive, fragile egos around consuming only the right kind of culture, which is usually heavily biased toward the new or the obscure. Entry 3407 is incredibly blunt about this.
What does it say?
It says, you're not a more cultured person if you avoided pop culture.
Ouch, but true.
Right. Consider the snobbery of someone who refuses to watch a massive blockbuster movie or listen to a top 40 song simply because it is popular. They view their avoidance as a badge of intellectual purity.
They're conflating obscurity with quality.
Yeah.
And Entry 3408 warns us against this exact behavior. It says the worst rules are those that limit discovery.
Which that kind of snobbery absolutely does.
If human psychology hasn't evolved, then insights into the human condition can be found literally anywhere. Avoiding pop culture isn't a sign of superior intelligence. It is an artificial boundary driven by ego. It is a self-imposed rule that actively damages your ability to discover new patterns.
Which brings us to the profound synthesis of these ideas in Entry 3406. It acts as the philosophical anchor for this entire segment.
I love this one.
It says, everything goes to seed. Choose your seeds wisely and know when to plant them. I want to linger on the mechanics of that gardening metaphor because it ties the old, the new, and the pop culture together perfectly.
Think about a physical garden. A plant grows, it reaches its peak bloom, and eventually it goes to seed. It reaches the end of its life cycle. But in that decay, it produces the concentrated genetic material for the next generation. The text is applying this biological reality to human output. Everything in culture. A 16th century masterpiece, a viral internet meme, a groundbreaking architectural movement, a pop song eventually goes to seed. It all becomes the raw genetic material of the past.
So if you divide the world into rigid categories of old versus new or high art versus pop culture, you are acting like a gardener who stubbornly refuses to collect seeds from half the plants in existence.
Precisely. You are starting your own future garden because of a completely arbitrary rule.
That is so limiting.
It is. The insightful mind does not judge the origin of the seed. They recognize that a profound observation about human nature might be embedded in a cheap comic book just as easily as it is in a classical symphony.
Because it's all human hardware.
Exactly. The artist's job is to gather seeds from every available source without prejudice. The wisdom lies entirely in knowing exactly when and where to plant those seeds in your own process.
But dropping those arbitrary rules and gathering seeds from the places society deems low value, that requires a massive amount of courage.
It does.
You have to trust your own taste over the collective judgment of the crowd. And that requires a pivot into the final and perhaps most psychologically demanding entries in the text. Entry 3409 declares, long-term artistry requires defiance.
The forces that press against you, economic pressures, changing cultural trends, the judgment of your peers, they are constant.
It's always pushing against you.
Always. And if you do not have an internal mechanism of defiance, those external forces will simply crush your output into a shape that conforms to whatever is safe.
The text provides a perfect historical example of this defiance, the artist Cy Twombly.
Yes, a great example.
Context, for those who don't know, Twombly's paintings often look like massive, chaotic scribbles on a canvas, frenetic loops, scratches, drips of paint, and the text points out that his work was routinely mocked. People would look at it and say, my kid could do it.
It is the most common dismissive insult leveled at abstract work.
Oh, absolutely.
It is designed to invalidate not just the artwork, but the artist's entire lifetime of effort.
Imagine the psychological toll of that. Imagine dedicating decades of your life to developing a specific visual language, doing the meticulous reps we talked about at Swallow Cliff, developing your tools, pouring your absolute soul into these massive canvases.
It's a huge vulnerability.
Right. And the collective public, including professional critics, looks at your life's work and compares it to the unthinking scribbles of a toddler.
Yeah.
And Trombley's response was to just keep painting. He didn't pivot. He didn't try to make it more palatable. The text explicitly calls him exemplary because he stood his ground.
That is the physics of defiance in action. He used the friction of their mockery as the surface to push against.
I love that.
He refused to alter the seeds he was planting just because the public didn't understand the garden. But this brings us to a stark, almost paradoxical warning in the final entry we are examining today. Entry 3410.
The curveball at the end.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because we naturally assume that the ultimate goal of all this effort, the careful attention to details, the mastery of true tools over effects, the courageous gathering of seeds, and the sheer defiance of Cy Twombly, we assume the goal is to finally arrive at success. Yet entry 3410 states, success sometimes means you don't feel the need to make anything else. And it concludes with this really haunting assertion. It's better to always have the desire.
This feels like a trap. I mean, if defiance fuels the artist, if Twombly needs the crowd pushing against him to generate the energy to push back, then what happens when the crowd stops pushing?
That's the question.
What happens when everyone suddenly agrees that you are a genius and your work is flawless?
The friction vanishes. And without friction, there is no forward momentum. This is the profound contradiction of the creative life. Defiance is the engine required to survive the journey and achieve success. But the arrival at success can act as a destructive force because it annihilates the very desire to create.
Because you've already won.
Right. When you are completely comfortable, when the world tells you that you have definitively arrived, the necessity of doing those difficult, exhausting reps suddenly evaporates. The moment the exertion feels unnecessary, the internal fire begins to suffocate.
It fundamentally changes how we should view our own ambitions. I mean, we started this deep dive exploring the emotional potluck we bring to our shared spaces. learning that we are active agents, not passive participants.
Hmm.
We moved into the solitary, grueling discipline of building the muscle of care through tiny repetitions. We slipped away the illusion of AI effects to find our true tools. We dismantled our cultural snobbery to gather seeds from everywhere. And we analyzed the absolute stubborn defiance required to protect that work from a mocking world.
It is a complete trajectory from the chaotic external environment to the fiercely guarded internal process.
But if entry 3410 is accurate, well, I mean, if long-term artistry requires the constant friction of pushing forces and achieving total success actually extinguishes the underlying desire to make the next thing, it leaves us with a deeply uncomfortable question.
The very uncomfortable one.
You, listening to this, analyzing your own career, your own projects, your own ambitions, is the ultimate goal of a truly vibrant creative life to actively avoid feeling completely successful.
Yeah.
Because if arriving at the finish line means you lose the hunger to build, to paint, or to discover, maybe the perpetual hunger itself is the only meaningful victory.